We've had some time to let the news sink in, but yes, it's true. Six Flags America in Upper Marlboro, Maryland is closing forever after the end of the 2025 season. It's always a sad time when an amusement park closes for good, but when it's part of a chain as massive as Six Flags, it tends to send shockwaves through the community. Six Flags America got its start as a wildlife preserve in 1972 before being reinvented as an amusement park named Wild World a decade later. The park would receive the Six Flags name as part of the huge Premier Park Six Flags acquisition of the late 90s, along with countless other parks of the time. The park's first few years as a Six Flags saw continued investment, with new areas and attractions being added on a yearly basis, but by the mid-2000s this kind of investment nearly came to a halt, and for the last 20 years the park would only see smaller additions with the sporadic relocated roller coaster every so often. For this reason, Six Flags America became somewhat of the punching bag of the whole Six Flags chain, with amusement park and coaster enthusiasts mocking it as a park of hand-me-down rides that nobody else wanted. When you look at it like that, it might seem easy to see why the park is closing, but for locals in the Baltimore and Washington, D.C. area, Six Flags America was a staple of the community for over 4 decades. And while the amusement park had its faults, the water park picked up the slack and was arguably the most popular part of Six Flags America. I was able to visit the park in September 2019, and although I went in with low expectations, I had a lot of fun and didn't think the park deserved all the hate it's received over the years. With that said, this was my first time at any Six Flags park since I started getting seriously into roller coasters, so I didn't have much to compare it to. Well, unless you count my visit to Six Flags Worlds of Adventure back in 2001 when I was 5, but I don't count that. I thought the park was charming overall, albeit with a strange layout. There were multiple large open areas where it looked like an attraction could go, but there was nothing there. The most egregious of these was Batwing, the park's Vekoma Flying Dutchman, which is placed randomly in a field behind Superman. It's almost as though they had planned to develop this area further, but then gave up after Batwing opened. It really feels disconnected from the rest of the park. The entire DC area of the park definitely gave off the vibe of being stuck in the late 90s, and that makes sense being that was the last time this area got a large amount of investment. I found the coaster lineup at Six Flags America to be surprisingly varied. I did a review on Superman Ride of Steel after my visit in 2019 and found it to be an excellent hypercoaster, strange layout notwithstanding. Yeah, we all know it's a mirrored clone of the one at Darien Lake, but the sense of speed you get going through those giant helixes is something else. Batwing ended up being my favorite coaster at the park and the only Vekoma Flying Dutchman I ever got to ride. Some of you may disagree, but I prefer this over any of the B&M flying coasters I've been on. Batwing is much more intense, and going through a loop on your back is something you just have to ride to believe. The park had a decent launch coaster in Joker's Jinx, and yeah, it's the same as Poltergeist at Fiesta Texas or the Flight of Fear coasters, but it's still a good layout and there are plenty of head choppers along the way. Roar I thought was a pretty serviceable wooden coaster. I only rode it once or twice and there wasn't a whole lot about it that stood out to me. It was good, but nothing mind-blowing. If Six Flags cared more about this park, then this would have been an easy candidate for the RMC treatment, just like the other Roar which became Joker at Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. But this one stayed original for its entire operational life, and while it lasted, it was a solid wooden coaster. Roar was overshadowed to me, though, by Wild One, definitely the biggest surprise of the trip. Wild One is actually one of the most historic coasters in the United States, as it dates back to 1917 when it opened at New York's Paragon Park. It operated there until the park closed in 1985, when it was then saved and relocated piece by piece to Six Flags America, then known as Wild World. It's the same thing that happened to Phoenix at Knoebels or Skyliner at Lakemont, wherein a wooden coaster was saved from demolition by another park and painstakingly reconstructed. You'd never see this happen to a wooden coaster nowadays due to the amount of work involved, but in this case, it definitely paid off. If I hadn't known going in that Wild One originally opened in 1917, I would never have guessed. It feels much more modern than it looks. It has a nice long layout, great sense of speed, some good moments of airtime throughout, and even some laterals on that helix at the end. The cherry on top is the fact that Wild One was designed by John A. Miller, who also designed Racer and Jackrabbit at Kennywood, which you know I'm familiar with. This might just be tied with Batwing for my favorite coaster at Six Flags America. Elsewhere in the park you've got Firebird, which, ow. I know it was the first B&M coaster, so I shouldn't go so hard on it, but man does this thing shake. When you enter and exit an inversion, Firebird will slam you around into your restraints. I rode it twice to make sure I didn't get a bad ride, and nope, still pretty painful. Maybe it was better as Apocalypse, but I'll never get to know now. Then you've also got Ragin' Cajun, the park's wild mouse. I think it's the same layout as Exterminator at Kennywood or Crazy Mouse at Del Grosso's, and much like those, I thought this one was fine. It was a good mid-sized thrill coaster at this park, and the kids there that day seemed to love it, so that was all well and good. Then you have the Vekoma SLC, which was called Mind Eraser at the time I visited, but has since been renamed to Professor Screamore's Skywinder. I had heard horror stories about how bad this coaster was, so I went in with the lowest of expectations, and honestly, I didn't find it bad at all. Yeah, it was pretty shaky, but it wasn't painful like so many people were saying. I thought Firebird was worse than this, and it's probably better now since they gave it the new-gen Vekoma trains. So there you have Six Flags America's coaster lineup. Not a bad assortment, all things considered, and there are some true standouts here. I think the reason people tend to be so harsh on this park's coaster lineup is because it doesn't compare to those of the larger Six Flags parks, which outclass Six Flags America in every way. But taken on its own, and from the perspective of someone who hadn't visited any other current Six Flags park at the time, I found Six Flags America to be an enjoyable park to spend a day at. Sure, the layout was weird and the operations were pretty slow, but for most of the day, I was having fun. But sadly, nothing lasts forever, and on May 1st the announcement was made that Six Flags America would close permanently following the end of the 2025 season. I feel like this was something that a lot of people considered to be a possibility for many years, but we never thought it would actually happen. As I said before, Six Flags investments into this park had slowed to a crawl in the last decade or so, with the sporadic relocated ride or off-the-shelf attraction, but the water park saw the most of the attention from the company. Six Flags seemed content to let the park stagnate for the most part, and that's the reason why Six Flags America found itself on the receiving end of so many jokes and criticism as the worst park in the entire Six Flags chain. It's a shame too, because this park could have been so much more. If you look at the park from overhead, there's so much undeveloped land surrounding it that could have been used to let the park grow over time. But whether it was due to declining attendance or disappointing revenue, Six Flags did not see this park as something worth continuing to invest into. November 2nd, 2025 is going to be the final day of operation for Six Flags America. After that, the park will be slowly dismantled and the land sold for redevelopment. Doesn't this whole situation sound familiar? Yeah, it's Astroworld all over again. A Six Flags park being shut down and demolished all because the land it sits on is allegedly worth more than the park itself. History does repeat itself, but will everything be repeated? Give it a year or two and we'll see if the land sells for much less than the company is expecting, leading to the CEO getting fired. I know a lot of you are secretly hoping for that. Man, this whole Six Flags Cedar Fair merger hasn't yielded a lot of positive developments, has it? We've got price hikes, dozens of unannounced ride closures, and now a whole park being shut down. I hope this is a case of it gets worse before it gets better, but I don't know anymore. The park closure was definitely decided after the merger, as they just redeveloped the area around their SLC, including new trains for the coaster and a Zamperla Nebula's ride. They spent all that money on revamping this area of the park only to get 2 seasons of use out of it. That alone leads me to believe that the decision to close the park was a sudden one. As for Six Flags America itself, there's no question that the park will be demolished, as the land is being sold for redevelopment, so it's unlikely that another company could come in and save the park. Most of the rides and attractions will likely be dispersed to other parks in the chain, but that doesn't mean that all of them are safe, especially the roller coasters. I'm not going to try to predict which coasters will end up at specific parks, as I don't think I've been to enough Six Flags and Cedar Fair parks to make so many educated guesses. What I will do though, is try to determine which coasters have the highest chance of being relocated. The kiddie coaster Great Chase is a given, as it's small and can be transported easily. I also think the Vekoma SLC, Skywinder, formerly Mind Eraser, is safe. Despite the fact that enthusiasts mostly hate these models of coasters, they are tried and true people pleasers and can be found at dozens of other parks. The fact they just painted it and gave it new trains leads me to believe the SLC will be moved to another medium-sized Six Flags park that could use it. Ragin' Cajun, being a wild mouse with a relatively small footprint, I think is also a shoo-in to be sent to another park. I mean, it was already, as it originally operated at Six Flags Great America before being moved here, so who's to say they won't do that again? Firebird, as much as I don't like it, I also think has a pretty good chance of getting another lease on life at another park. It received the floorless train conversion only 6 years ago, and it is a B&M after all, albeit a really shaky one, so it is relatively reliable and could fit in well elsewhere. Ugh, that means I'll have to ride it again if it gets moved though, so deep down I kinda hope they scrap this one. Joker's Jinx? It's tough to say. This is a really fun launch coaster with a compact twisting layout, but there are also at least 3 other coasters in the US with the exact same layout. If Six Flags can select a park near the West Coast, farther away from the other 3 premier Spaghetti Bowl coasters, then I could see this getting a second life. With that said, it seems more realistic that this will just become a parts donor for those 3 other coasters, so I've got a bad feeling about this one. Speaking of a bad feeling, Roar is definitely getting torn down. Reviews for this coaster in recent years have not been great, with even the best reviews calling the coaster simply okay. I will be shocked if this gets saved, so hurry over and get the credit, because Roar is not long for this world. On that note, as much as I would love for it to be saved, Batwing has no chance at a relocation. It's the last operating Vekoma Flying Dutchman in the world, after Nighthawk at Carowinds closed this past year, so they'll definitely use the opportunity to make the entire ride model extinct and not have to worry about the high maintenance that comes with them. This is going to be a huge shame, because I really did love getting to ride Batwing. This alone should be enough of a reason for anybody to make the trip here and ride a soon-to-be-extinct roller coaster model. I rode this thing nearly 6 years ago, and it still stands out in my mind as my favorite flying coaster from any manufacturer. It'll be sad to lose it, but I don't see any possible future where Six Flags decide to keep this operating elsewhere. Now the biggest coaster in the park, Superman Ride of Steel. This one is tricky. My gut tells me that there's no way a coaster of this size could be scrapped. However, it is a mirror image clone of the other Ride of Steel at Darien Lake, so it's not like it's a one-of-a-kind layout. It is definitely a crowd pleaser and has great capacity, but how many parks are there in the Six Flags chain that not only have the space, but also the attendance numbers to justify the maintenance cost of a huge Intamin mega coaster? A lot of them with the right attendance already have a coaster over 200 feet, so moving Superman there would be unnecessary. I have no idea where this could end up. I have a bad feeling Superman will end up scrapped in the new trains used at Darien Lake. I could be wrong though, you never know. Lastly, I've saved the one that will hurt the most to lose, Wild One. At the time I'm making this video, this is the oldest operating coaster in the United States, as it originally opened at Paragon Park back in 1917. With that said, the coaster has been moved, reconstructed, and modified over the years, so whether the coaster you see here is actually over 100 years old is up for debate. No matter what you think though, chances are slim that Wild One will be saved. It's an excellent coaster, no doubt, especially given its age, but how often do we see wooden coasters relocated in this day and age? Hardly at all. In fact, I think the last time Six Flags did that is when Great America relocated Little Dipper in 2010, and that was a much smaller coaster than Wild One. I would love to see Wild One saved, but I just don't think it's realistic to expect that to happen. There's always the possibility of a park like Knoebels stepping in and buying it, since they already moved a wooden coaster once before. But if I have to pick, I'd rather they save Leap the Dips first. The reality of the situation is that Wild One will likely be torn down with a few pieces of track auctioned off for charity, and the trains will probably end up in some private collection somewhere. Historical significance is not always enough to ensure that a coaster continues to operate, and I think we'll see that proven here. Go ride Wild One while you still can. I think enough time has passed between the closing announcement and now that it's finally sunk in for most people. This is the final season for Six Flags America, and while it was far from the best Six Flags park, it had a solid lineup, and I'm sure it will be missed. I think the part that upsets me most is how this will likely impact the surrounding community. This park has been around in some form since the 1970s. People grew up coming here and took their own children here. Six Flags America didn't have a long, storied history such as a park like Geauga Lake, but it was around long enough to become a staple of the Baltimore and DC area. Upper Marlboro will lose one of its biggest attractions and sources of revenue. Dozens of people will lose their jobs, and locals will lose their home park. Think about it. I go to Kennywood all the time and meet up with friends, then we spend the evening marathoning coasters and cap it off with last ride of the night on Phantom's Revenge. There are absolutely people whose home park is Six Flags America, and they do that exact same thing with the coasters there. And now they won't be able to do that anymore after this year. I guess what I'm trying to say here is nothing lasts forever, so enjoy what you have while you still have it. Go to your local amusement park, document it with pictures and videos, and share your experiences with others. Our love of these amusement parks is what ties us all together in this community. Who cares if a park is considered bad by the public? If you have the opportunity, check it out anyway, because it might just leave an impression that will last longer than the park itself. That's all for this video. Thank you all for watching, and as always, stay tuned for more amusement parks here on Rampaging Rex Productions.